We're back, folks. Two ordinary cops back again. Schulte, mate, how are you?
Yeah, mate, I'm going pretty well here. We've got another exciting episode, I think, coming up. But, mate, first of all, we'll just mention news this week. I think it was Monday. Desi Freeman was finally located, shot and killed, I believe, from what I hear in the media. Do you want to say anything about that, mate?
Yeah, mate, that's 7 months. That's a huge manhunt. So a huge shout out to Victoria Police for just keeping going on that and staying right on top of it. And I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but pretty well every police tactical group in Australia had something to do with that at some point. So that is an absolutely massive operation. I can't think of anything that even comes close to 7 months, except for obviously, there's a couple that went years, but not 7 months intensive like it would have been. So obviously we don't know the facts, but there's a hell of a lot that goes. We understand how these jobs would take place, and mate, that is massive to finally hunt him down and locate him there. That's just off the charts. So huge shout out to Vic Pol, you're the toast of the country this week. Well done.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And, mate, do you want to reintroduce, I suppose, our guest back by popular demand, Mr. Andy
By
Bedwell?
popular demand. Yeah, he's back. G'day,
How
mate.
are you,
What's
Andy?
cracking?
I'm good, Schulte. It could only be that they want to hear more stories about my dream with Damo. Maybe I've kept them up on suspended.
I know I don't, but maybe other people do, so that's okay. Yeah, kind of concerning. Yeah, no,
Oh,
happy
dear.
days, mate. We had a ball last week. It was really good. I did forget. I was kind of excited because it all kind of happened pretty quickly. I told the crew at Uluru Cutter Judah Fire Crew that I'd give them a shout out, and I completely forgot because Bedwell came on. So a shout out to Michaela, Hannah, Cass, and Ella Mella from the Parks Australia crew at Uluru who did the fire training last week. So second last week in March at Uluru, right at the base, mate. We were looking straight up, basically 80 degrees above us was the rock. It was awesome. So yeah, we did that was our fire crew training last week. Sorry, ladies, I forgot you last week. I was a little bit excited. Yeah.
And why
Hey,
wouldn't you?
listen, what an awesome. Well, sorry, Schulte. What an awesome part of the world. I know certainly you and I, Damo, worked a fair bit out that way and spent a fair bit of time at the Rock. But a little bit like remote policing, people don't really understand how much work people who are in the emergency services, whether they're volunteer or full time, do out there, because it's not just fighting fires. There's lots of rescue work, lots of search and rescue work. There's lots of some of the most horrific car accidents happen out there, and they're oftentimes the first and only responders to those. So that's a pretty special gig.
And the other thing of these guys, mate, they are park rangers. So they're mostly to do with environment. They're not necessarily first responders, but they become first responders. And that that particular crew, the stories we were telling we did a one component called Work in a Team, and they were talking about their response to the flooding that occurred the week before we got there, and that was still hot in their mind. And it was great. We actually facilitated an after action review with them in the room, and it was actually brilliant. They were all talking about the things that came up, and that's when we pointed out to them that you guys are definitely first responders. You understand that you coordinated a huge response there to what was potentially a very dangerous situation. Hundreds of millimeters of rain pretty quickly in the desert, and apart from the dirty big rock, everything else is dead flat. So that water comes up and then gets to a point where it has to go somewhere. So, you've got lots of tourists. I was in the Cairns airport. I saw them get straight off the flight from Tokyo and get straight on the flight to Uluru. And Japanese-speaking hosts, Japanese-speaking tour guides out of the rock, and you got to coordinate that shit. So yeah, massive hats off. It was a good week, and a huge shout out too to my old mate Nathan Finn. He happened to I caught up with him on Tuesday night, and he happened to drop in with us on Wednesday morning and had a chat to the girls as well. So that was really good. Yeah. So anyway, that's just wrapping up what I should have spoken about last week.
Yeah,
How is the little fella?
Not very little. No, he's doing well. He's going really. He's a busy man. He's a very busy man, but I've got a lot of time for Finney. He's
That's
a very,
exciting.
very large human.
Very large human.
Mate, I think that actually probably segues nicely what you're talking about there, because what we really want to talk about, and we mentioned at the end of last episode, was leadership. Now, Damo and I have discussed this at length, but who better to help us out than one of the people that trained us, I suppose, in leadership to some extent. And Andy, you've done quite a bit of research about it, mate. So we're just going to let you have the floor and talk about how important leadership is and some of its origins and how important it is to, I suppose, instill into even not only the police but also businesses and corporate entities and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, look, thanks, Shorty. For me, it's a really, really important topic, especially as we talk about policing. Look, you would be mad, and anybody who has worked in policing in the last 20 years would be blind if they didn't recognise that there is a massive leadership problem, and there has been for a while. Something that I used to always talk about as a leader is I hate hearing about problems without solutions. So I'm not somebody who's going to sit here and whinge about the leadership problem in policing without being able to suggest some solutions. So I'd like to present some stuff today. The most important thing that I would say here is that, without getting into kind of long-winded discussions about it, I don't regard myself as being a great leader or a particularly great leader. There's leadership skills, no question about it, amongst lots of people. What I thoroughly enjoy doing and have done is studied leadership, and it's an integral part. I did like my academic studies and studied leadership. Because I just am intrigued. I'm intrigued by it, and I'm intrigued about. For me, the topic when I talk about my policing career, I primarily say, look, my job, particularly as a detective, but as a police officer, is a problem solver. Right? That's ultimately what we do. If you break it down to its simplest form, what we do is solve problems, and there's a couple of lessons that I learned. First is this: the problem is never the problem. How we deal with the problem is the problem, right? And if you want no better example than that, let's look at COVID. COVID was ugly, whichever way you looked at it. Without going into the politics and the division that went on around COVID, COVID was never the problem. How governments dealt with COVID was the problem. And I think everybody would recognise that the various state governments and territory governments around the country dealt with it very poorly. And for me, I'm more interested in why. What happened there? Why did it happen? So that's one. One observation is the problem is never the problem. How you deal with the problem is the problem. Or it can be the good thing, right? But the problem's never the problem. The other thing is, if you want to understand any problem, you have to understand three things. You have to understand the causes, the drivers, and the triggers of that problem. Now, that's something that remote police officers understand better than anybody. When you know, Schulte, you're probably best suited to answer this one. But when you're working in those little two-man, and oftentimes you're only there one up, and somebody comes and knocks on your door and says, "Hey, they're arguing down there," you know you've got to deal with that there and then, before that spark becomes a bushfire. It has to be dealt with, because if it goes further, then there's a big problem. So you have to deal with the causes of problems really quickly, and you learn that, right? You never wait, and you can tell inexperience in remote policing. Inexperience will be, that's not a big deal, I don't need to deal with this, and you wait for 3 days, and by that stage it's too late and it's a massive problem. Yeah? So I don't know whether you want to expand on that before I yarp on anymore, but if we can understand these little bits and pieces, it helps us platform leadership going forward.
Yeah, mate. Like especially, I suppose, in remote communities, if you do let anything even cinder away, it will become a big problem. One of the biggest things in communities is always having your finger on the pulse, and you do that by actually walking. I used to make a note of actually walking to the store just so I could chat to people, hear what's going on behind the scenes, and you also make sure you have your intel, because if you can put a stop to it before it gets bigger, it, mate, yeah, the amount of workload you've saved yourself and injury and potential victims is huge. So yeah, mate,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I used to talk about it about with my ear to the railway tracks constantly. So I spent a fair bit of time in Columbaroo community, which is in the far north of Western Australia. It's probably the most remote Aboriginal community in Australia. I think so we used to travel out of Kununurra to there. So Kununurra is 1,100 kilometres to Broome, but you go up the Gibb River Road. It's about a 12 and a half hour drive to get up to Columbaroo, up off the Gibb River Road. It is incredibly remote. So you do not have backup. It is the most remote place. You can let things go. And you're right about intel, so that you understand what I'm talking about now? Causes, drivers, triggers. I would literally go into emergency management mode if I got intel that there was a bottle of rum coming into town. And this is going to sound really strange, but I would get intel to say there was some ganja coming into town, and I was far less concerned than the bottle of rum, because I know that that bottle of rum equaled an out of control community for me, and that could be 400 people rioting. So you learn to understand those are causes, those are drivers, and these are triggers of a problem, right? Yeah, and Damo, feel free to chime in on that if it rings true. I mean, you worked Borroloola, which is one of the most volatile communities
Yeah.
in the country.
You guys are nailing it. I'm just letting you talk because you're doing well.
He must have gas, Schulte.
No, I'm doing the TEDS thing. I'm just letting you blokes say how it is because you're completely correct. If you want me to chime in, I will, because you're 100% correct there. I've arrested people for very minimal street offences in Borroloola, knowing full well that what I just saved was definitely an aggravated assault, but potentially a serious harm, potentially then ongoing social disorder for God knows how long, and I've nipped it in the bud by locking someone up for disorderly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how it is, right? And it and it works. It saves lives when you learn how to do it well, right? So all of this is, I'm going somewhere with this, right? Because all of this is platforming where it's at, and providing some background and some story to what's to this topic will help to cement it. The next thing I'll say is that policing in general is a fairly simple trade if it's done correctly and it's done on the front foot. Now, I'll use Tennant Creek as an example here. I can recall being in Tennant Creek on what they would call a busy night. And look, don't get me wrong. There were nights in Tennant Creek for that small little town when you would have thought you were in downtown Mogadishu during the middle of the war. And I'm not trying to be derogatory here. I'm just saying people from outside, police officers from outside of the Northern Territory would not comprehend what it was that you were dealing with in those places.
The only thing missing was AK-47 fire. That was the only thing. That's the only difference.
It was, but it was what replaced AK-47s was the shrill of a voice of like I can't I don't know how to describe the sound of multitudes of angry interactions going on constantly in across the like fireworks on firework nights. So people outside of the territory wouldn't understand that either. Or it's just constant. There's just something going on. And like heaven forbid, I don't know what Tennant Creek would have been like after they implemented radio, like comms directing jobs there. You know, I'm talking about days when it was just phone calls to the station, putting out jobs. It was just constant. But I can remember on a night there where the team was fairly flustered. I'm talking about the general duties team now, and I'd stepped up. You might remember this, Damo.
I remember.
And like I literally, like there was jobs stacking up, there was big things going on, and what was like it would seem like it was out of control. And I can remember just stopping, just saying, troops, stop. I want you all to meet me on top of One Tank Hill. The whole team. Doesn't matter what you're at right now, drive up the hill. And we stood there on the top of the hill overlooking the town. Fairly flat place, but you can overlook the township of Tennant Creek from where the big water tank is, and it's called One Tank Hill. And from that space, I said, I looked across and I said, okay, what do you see? They go, nothing, the town. I said, okay, what do you hear? It's the occasional dog bark and sound you could hear out over across the boondocks. But I said, no one's dying. It's not out, like, can you hear this? Right. We're just going to go back and we're going to deal with this one job at a time. It's a simple job. We're going to turn up to the first job, and the first thing we're going to establish is peace. Don't worry about arresting people and how you're going to do this and what's going to happen here and how. Just don't preempt. We're going to turn up, and we're going to ask a question. Am I required to bring about peace here? Yes, no. Great. The next question is, does this require the intervention of the justice system? Or can we just come here, bring about peace and leave? You don't have to turn this into a bigger than Ben-Hur. You don't have to do anything. We're just going to... And then, if we do have to intervene, what do we do next? It's one step at a time. It's the analogy. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
So glad you said that. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, keep going. Yeah.
No, feel free to jump in, Damo, but this is it. This is it, right? It's about bringing this down. So if I say to you, that's the job, that's how we do this, and this is how we deal with one of the busiest spots in the country, then really that's the mode that we should be working in across the board. And what I'd say is somewhere along the line, we took that simple job and we turned it into an overcomplicated mess of over-administration, over-policing, overthinking, over-involvement, over-interaction, over-legislating, over-regulating, and it turned what should be the simplest job on the planet into the most complicated job. Now, I'll pause for a second and let you two reflect on that before we talk about solutions.
Actually, yeah, mate, I'm going to kick in there. You've just reminded me of something. And one thing I used to, when I was training people in Catherine, I said, our job is to make sure we stop that behaviour continuing. So how we go about that, whether it's just a warning, whether it's just showing up, whether it's just a warning, whether it's a ticket, whether it's an arrest or a summons, I said, our point is to make sure we stop that behaviour continuing and, victims basically coming about and all that. That's our job. So I think that marries in nicely, and it's kind of, it's something that I used to always say because we don't have to go in guns blazing. We just have to sit there and see what the problem is. As long as you believe in your mind that person or those people are not going to continue that behaviour, in whatever action you take, you've done your job.
So what I love about what you said as well is that I was a huge fan of the saying, attend and assess. So I used to say this all the time in Darwin. I used to get the shits. I used to say it over Channel 1 when I'd hear, could have been a Casuarini, I didn't care. I was a Darwin shift supervisor. I'd hear him going, well, what more have you got? Have you got more information? And I'd just get on there and go, hey guys, how about you just attend and assess and you tell comms what's going on? Because they've only had a phone call. They don't know anything. Why don't you turn up and actually tell comms what's occurring? And that was the end of that. But it's, mate, I couldn't agree more with the overthinking, the over-analysis. It's like, what's happening here right now? Well, we've got an angry man over there belly aching. Yep. What else? Well, nothing. Exactly. So is he going to go to the Supreme Court for that? No. However, is that going to cause a problem? Potentially. Yeah, potentially it will. Okay. So how do we deal with that? Like, just get rid of it now. It's like, hey, uncle, come on, done, finished. You might got to go now. Or you come with me for being disorderly, all the rest of it. And that was how it was done. It was just nip it in the bud. Oh, anyway, you keep going. We could back and forth.
Damo, you're correct. And look, that's what interests me more is why? Why have we become so overcomplicated in our thinking? And I believe I've got some answers to that. And it comes to overregulation. It's, again, I'll get on a political soapbox here, but this is the problem with rapidly becoming socialist and communist governments, which is all about over-regulation, over-policing, over-government, over-taxing, So I'm not going to get on a political bandwagon there, but what happens is we're just over-regulating. There's too many rules. There's too many ways around, and rules don't fix problems, yeah? We're back to the problem. You don't fix a problem with another problem. You fix a problem by understanding the causes, drivers, and triggers of a problem, right? So that gets us to the next topic, which is a platform topic, which is this concept of proactive policing, right? Because I am a firm believer in proactive policing, but I will state here, hand on heart, I reckon, I'm going to be generous here. I would say that somewhere less than 10% of police officers around the country actually understand what proactive policing is. What we have is a number of what's called proactive policing strategies, but they're not really. They're just kind of slightly more proactive, reactive strategies.
Yep.
And that is another major problem. There is a concept in the academic literature known as the Rule of 60, which I'll really briefly touch on here. Now, when I mention this to you, the two of you are going to go, that would make sense. So before I left the Northern Territory Police, I worked on a resource allocation model project, which was looking at how we should resource the Northern Territory Police. Now, most people won't understand this, but when we look at police officers per 100 head of populace, the Northern Territory Police massively exceeds. Like I'm talking about, this is how it goes. Northern Territory Police is here. All the remaining police officers in Australia have this many. So we have like 8 times the amount of police officers per 100 head of populace than anywhere else in the country. In fact, there is only a couple of countries in the world that have more. So that says a couple of things. It does speak to need. I'm not going to sit here and say we don't need that many police officers, but I would say that we probably could police differently and probably not require a huge amount more. But that's a different story. What we're getting to here is how we Rule of 60, right? How we would be better placed to do our policing. So the Rule of 60 says this in a policing environment. 60% of any given shift. So let's talk about a general duties shift, okay? Response policing. So that's your general duties, uniform coppers, your non-uniform coppers who are working in a response capacity on any given day or night. So what should happen is that 60% of a given shift time should be spent reacting to things. That leaves 40% of your time to conduct true proactive policing strategies. Okay, so I'm talking about driving in a certain area because the intelligence says that there's been problems there, not because there's been a call to say it's there. Going to the backs of those shopping centres, going to your problem drinking areas, going to where you know your drug houses are, and just parking up with lights flashing so no drugs are sold for 2 hours. I can't tell you how many times I tried working in tactical police, in like tactical investigation policing, like the command TAC team, where I would try and get traffic police officers and the strategies to work around this. Stop policing a road that's had no problems for however many years, and just because you can get an X amount of tickets, and actually park your police cars up in front of this block of flats for 4 hours and do some traffic there. All drug dealers drive cars. Not all car drivers are drug dealers. Mm-hmm. But let's get proactive about it. I used to talk about this all the time just with that park your traffic car on top of a hill with the lights flashing so that cars coming can see it. And that, what is your purpose here? Is it to get tickets or to slow traffic down? Because you're going to slow far more traffic down by parking on top of a hill and letting everyone see you than you are parking at the bottom of the hill, catching one driver, letting 15 speeders go past, and then catching another driver. So true proactive policing is about thinking about how you do things in a way. Sorry, I've now ripped on traffic coppers. I really apologise to you all out there.
Oh, mate, I've ripped
But
on them heaps. We've had feedback how much I've ripped on them.
But it used to kill me that we could have used our traffic policing units so effectively in crime reduction by involving them in targeted policing of criminals, targeting people we knew that had committed crimes that we couldn't get them for, and targeting them for traffic policing. Like I said, sitting outside known locations, sitting outside problem locations and do your RBTs there. And that's proactive policing. And not to mention, when you're working in remote communities, there's a load of this. But when you're spending 100% of your time responding to that radio, you can't do proactive policing. And proper, true, down to it. Like, how many times did you hear a shift sergeant say, you, I want you to drive out the driveway, turn left, drive to this suburb and do this here because our intelligence has told us that's where problems are going to be. They're not. You jump straight in the car, you log on and say, what's the first job you've got for me?
Yep.
All right, so Rule of 60 says that your staffing numbers should be such that you only spend 60% of your time responding to jobs. That leaves you 40% of your time to do proactive operations. So that mathematics is not that complicated to work out. But that would work. Now, in an ideal world, and I get it, there's staffing problems. Once again, the problem's not the problem. Why we've got the problem's the problem. There should never be a staffing issue for policing. Should be the greatest job on the world. So we need to ask ourselves why we've got a staffing problem, for starters. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'll take a breath for a minute because that's a platform statement. Go, Schultze.
Yeah, mate, that's interesting, and I've mentioned this in the podcast before. When I was working out at Borroloola, the senior sergeant came out, and he said, "I want to see you guys out on the road more, like, basically doing that proactive policing and blah blah blah." And I just turned around in front of everyone and I said, "I'd love to, boss, but unfortunately, the amount of paperwork you have us doing is so extreme." That I'm sitting behind a computer. I love being out there chatting to people. I love getting my intel by just chatting to people, making those acquaintances, seeing who's in town. I said, that's what I love doing. That's what I love about policing. However, to give you an example, I remember out at Kalkaringi in 2008, I think we arrested 24 people. We cleared 18 warrants. We remanded 6 in custody with 2 computers, 6 cops, 3 cars, in 24 hours. I said, we've just done that in Borroloola with double the amount of manpower, double the amount of computers, and I said, we've got 2 in custody and we're still flat out doing paperwork. Mm-hmm. So you tell me, this is your problem. You have given us too much paperwork, too much scrutiny about what we need to do, so we can't actually get out on the road and do our job, which is what we're employed to do. So I don't know if you want to add on that.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. Sorry, I'll add on to that. So, bloody, you're just triggering the shit out of me, both of you, but that's okay. So I remember getting into Darwin, and the thing is, you got to remember when Schultze and I hit the ground in Katherine in 2007, the end of 2007. What do you think our number one job was? And I don't have to ask you. It was driving around, tipping out piss, taking away people who were intoxicated already, and taking them away under a provision up in the Northern Territory that allowed them to go to the cells and sleep off their grog instead of actually being taken to court. Lawyers hate this stuff because it removes the power from the judiciary. However, it is community policing, and exactly what you said earlier. It is. Does this require the intervention of the justice system, or can we just solve this shit right now with legislation that we have? You got to remember, our offenders weren't thinking in an overly complicated manner. They were pouring as much piss into their skull as they could possibly achieve. And all we were doing was getting them at a point of that intoxication where they hadn't yet either been the offender or the victim in a crime, which was going to occur earlier. Because I've said this a number of times on this podcast. Remember back in the old days where if you could get rid of the grog and get rid of the problematic drunks early when they hadn't committed any crime, night shift had a decent night. You had removed the problem. They were still going to get calls, shit was still going to happen, but it was going to be manageable. If for whatever reason, and most of the time it wasn't laziness, it was actually you've been tied up through the day with something, or you've had rollover from the night before and the snowball's starting to build, and you haven't had the opportunity to be out there. Excuse me. You haven't had the opportunity to be out there actually doing that. Night shift got their ass handed to them with job after job after job where they were completely tied up dealing with actual victims, actual offending. Now the justice system is involved because they have to be. So where it could have been dealt with earlier, it's no longer there. And I'll flick back to you, Bedwell, because I love this shit. But I remember then as a shift sergeant in Darwin many years later, there was none of that shit. We had crews whose job was to be the proactive ones, and my guys were just the job to job to job to job. And like you said, you just logged on. We'd turn up there, and the shift sergeant would go, "Any of your guys ready to go mobile?" And we go, "You guys right?" And they're like, "Yeah, grab a car, mate. You're on. Just book on when you get there. You're going to get sent to God knows what." So they're overwhelmed with the proactive side of it. Needed to start 48 hours before where we're at now. It was too late, and it remained too late forever, and it's still too late. They're just reactive. There's nothing proactive about general duties policing at the moment, I would say.
So you are totally correct, both of you, in your observation. So that we don't become the standard, jaded, broken career cops complaining about the system, I'd much rather jump onto solutions about what's... And there, to be honest, I believe there are. And
we have to say, yes, we agree, because we're nodding, but not everyone's going to see us. So yeah, we completely agree. We're solutions-based people. And we've been saying that forever. We don't go TJF. That would have been one episode and we would have never gone again.
And so, never get anywhere. Yeah, no, it's all good. This is it, right? This is where the rubber hits the road. I am a firm believer in leadership and good leadership, but this is the cause and the driver of the problems. I genuinely do not believe that the Northern Territory Police needs a vast number more cops than what they've currently got. The way in which we police needs to change, and leadership needs to actually take proper leadership and stop worrying about. There's so much focus on this academic project and this, HR thing here. We need to get back to this is policing in its simplest form. This is investigation in its simplest form. This is what our job is. We are not marriage counsellors. It should never have been our responsibility to deal with the health crisis that was COVID. But it defaults to police dealing with it because we know how to deal with problems and health doesn't. Full stop. I know I'm going to bear wrath from health people, but ultimately, teachers, they're just not cut out for it. Police officers are trained, and it's our job to fix crises and fix emergencies. So we end up in charge of these things. But what we did do at that period of time was take police officers off the road to deal with a minor health problem. And we didn't know it was minor at the time, and I'll give people that, but it ultimately was a minor health problem. If you remember back, they were talking about thousands of Aboriginal people dying in communities and buying up body bags and doing this, and it was a storm in a teacup. It was a nothing event, and we wasted gigadollars on it, and we burnt police officers out manning borders to stop people driving across and things like that. So that's a prime example of where leadership fails. That I would love to see a model where just for a short period of time, we actually picked people based upon their leadership skills and not based on all of this this is someone who isn't I'm not a good academic, but I have an academic background. I'm a child of academics, and I'll give a shout out to my mum and dad who listen to this too, Damo. They love it, and they probably taught me more about leadership than anything else. as I know your dad did too, Damo. But what I'm talking about here is that we've somehow in policing, it's not just policing, it's happened across a lot of different sectors, but we're talking about policing, and it's imperative that good leadership exists in a law enforcement environment. But we lost our way at picking leaders to do leadership roles, right? So I say this all the time. For millennia, we've worked out how to choose leaders because they're good leaders. 3,000 odd years ago, Master Sun Tzu wrote his masterpiece, The Art of War. Master Sun Tzu quoted this, and it's no truer. If you take someone who is a natural leader of 100 men and put them in charge of 10, tomorrow 100 people will be following him. If you take someone who is a natural leader of 10 and put them in charge of 100, tomorrow only 10 will be following him. So it doesn't matter what title you give someone, what bird shit you put on their shoulders. None of that matters, because leadership is about followership. I'm now quoting, that's a direct quote from Colin Powell, who I spoke about last week, who is arguably one of the foremost experts on leadership. He just said straight up, if I'm going to an organisation to assess them about their leadership, I will go to their followership and I will start at the bottom, because that will tell me everything I need to know about the leader. But we don't do that, not in policing. Leaders are made overnight. Okay, so that's one. We just can't. We've failed at this dismally, at not picking leaders. Okay, so I'll quote another academic, Joseph Schaefer. Joseph Schaefer rewrote the FBI's leadership charter in the 90s. He was only a fairly young guy in his 30s at the time. He now lectures on leadership at one of the Ivy League universities out of Massachusetts. I'm not sure where. I think it might be Harvard. But he said at the time, look, it's almost an impossible thing to do for me to be able to tell you what qualities a good police leader has. It's just hard. There's no literature on it. There's nothing out there. Other than if I go out and I interview people just know who leaders are. But he said, for some reason, they're not who we're picking to be leaders. He said, but what I can do, he said, there is mountains of academic literature on poor leaders. And he said here's a few things, right? And I'll let you soak on this, and then we can talk about people that we might know, with or without their names mentioned. But poor leaders are first and foremost poor communicators. Mm-hmm. They isolate people. They are micromanagers because they don't trust. They have very, very, very low trust, and they hold people to very, very, very high account. And because they don't trust people, they put picket fences around them, and they deliberately shut out the people who are natural leaders, and they promote people that they know are no threat to them. Yeah. And that forms what is well known in documented literature as the glass ceiling of leadership, because you end up with a group of leaders who are not leaders, who can't do anything. They've got no support structure around them because they've surrounded themselves with even more poor leaders. And all the good leaders, natural good leaders, get frustrated and either give up or leave. And so you end up with this big void. And the first thing we notice, he said, in every organisation that has systematically promoted poor leaders, you end up with a general disconnect between your workforce and your leadership. So that translates as the people on the ground have no idea what the people up top are thinking. The people on the ground are generally making their own decisions because there is no clear direction. There are no clear objectives given, and there is general confusion. And when things don't happen the way the poor leader wants them to happen, they come down with unnecessary discipline, and they end up punishing the hardest workers for what they do. Now, does that ring true and familiar to either of you?
Yeah, just about my whole career.
So this is not my observation, right? This is the observation of a foremost expert.
Yeah.
Bear with me. I'm just going to turn some lights on so I'm not sitting in candlelight.
Yeah. Well, while you do that, it's really interesting you say that. So, what I'm seeing throughout police forces, because it's not just the Northern Territory Police. We talk to every jurisdiction in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, God knows where else. It is ringing true everywhere, and it's refreshing. I see it now occasionally where you get some old school RFS. I'll give you an example. This is an RFS volunteer at a bushfire. I've been a police officer for 15 years. I've been an RFS volunteer for 4. We were at a fire at a little place called Lower Creek, which is just a tiny little place. There was a bushfire. It was day 2 of the bushfire. The major threat was gone, but there was mop up. We needed to mop up and make sure the fire was contained and didn't go anywhere else. It's not rocket science, right? This is simple as it gets, but it has to be done. He gave a SMEAX briefing, the likes of which I haven't seen the quality of for many years. It was so clear. For those who don't know, SMEAX is an acronym that's been used since, I believe, World War II. It's used across NATO. It's used in all military aspects. It's used all through all areas of, or definitely police and fire. I don't know about ambulance, but it's definitely used in police and fire. And emergency SES use it too. It's basically a way that you brief your crews, and it goes situation, which is just, this is what's occurred. Mission, this is our objective. This is why we are here, and this is what we need to do. Execution, this is how we're going to do it. Administration, logistics, these are the support functions that we have to make you do your job. When it comes to fire, it's basically here's your tucker, here's your drinking water, here's where you refuel, and here's where you refill your truck with water. And there might be others, but they're the 4. Command and communication, who's in charge, what's the radio channel? That's basically it. We have SMEAX with an S on the end, safety, what major safety hazards are there? He gave this briefing, and the rest of us got in that vehicle. We didn't have to say another word. We knew exactly what we were doing for the rest of the day. And I remember making the comment, here's this old retired bloke from Armidale who just gave us a briefing of the likes of which you have never seen. And had he given that same briefing at a number of sieges that I'd been in Darwin, we would have had a much better picture of what we're going to do. I'm not taking away from that. Those guys knew what they were doing. However, the simple art of communicating exactly why you are here was so important. It's like, what does success look like? What means we can knock off and leave? What is that? What does 100%? You have now achieved your objective. Well done. Debrief. Let's see if we can make it better next time. Let's see what we did well, see what we did poorly, what do we need to fix? Not blaming anyone, let's what do we need to fix for next time? And then we poke on back up the road and we head home. Communicate. If everyone turned up to work and knew exactly what was required, it'd be great. And this goes back to staffing. It's like my guys knew exactly what they were going to do. In Darwin, they turned up and they knew that it was going to go any available unit, and they were going to go VKM 481 available, let's roll, and they just follow the bouncing ball for the rest of the time. That clear objective, and that goes all the way to the top. And I'm ranting a bit now as well, but that goes right to the top of where we set what we call an incident, and this is my training stuff that I do now, but it's the incident controller, and replace that with anything else. What is the intent of the person in charge for us for this particular incident? So that's talking about incident management for a really big problem. However, it can apply to anything. It can apply to, righto, we're going to make pizzas and sell them. So what is our intent? Our intent is to sell as many pizzas as we can and make sure we have continued customer service and continued, salesmanship. So we have continued sales ongoing so that we are a business that lasts more than one weekend. Happy days. How do we do that? And you can move on from there. But the IC intent is a nice, big, simple thing. And then everyone knows what the job is.
You're right on it, Damo. So, and that's the C in SMEAC. It stands for command and communication. But this subject of command is probably one of the most important topics, right? So, and this now speaks to where the leadership problem, again, back to the rubber hitting the road. So here's what happens in real life. In real life, when a really bad thing happens, poor leaders tend to go missing and deliberately fall off. And your natural leaders just naturally sift to the surface. Okay, so that's just a recognised phenomenon. So at the police academy, at the police college in Darwin, when we're teaching operational safety and tactics, what we would talk to people about is in any given situation. So when we're now talking defensive tactics, we're talking about interacting. So how do we best go about this? The first thing that we need to establish whenever we're doing anything with team tactics is who's in control, who's in command. And so I would ask that question, who's in command? And the natural answer is, whoever's got the highest rank. Now, that's not the answer. The answer is not. The answer is in any given situation, any given critical incident, whoever assumes control in that moment is in command until they are formally relieved by somebody who may be of higher rank.
Yes.
But in the instant that something occurs, the person who assumes command is in control. And that was the only caveat that I could possibly implement to allow natural leaders to come to the surface. Because if we put people with the right rank structure on their shoulders in command, we were in deep shit. Because we were not promoting leaders. Okay, so here's a couple of statements, again, backed by academic literature. There is a vast difference between management and leadership. There are people who are fantastic managers who couldn't lead a chook raffle. And there are people who are phenomenal leaders but couldn't manage to make their own bed in the morning. And there are a few out there who are good at both, but they are different skill sets. And there's another mistake we make. We promote that busy person who likes to manage and boss things and to do stuff and suddenly give them rank. Just because they're well organised and know how to manage stuff does not make them a leader. Okay, 1. 2, reading a book and doing a course does not make you a leader. Okay, any more than me going and doing a course on sprinting will suddenly make me an Olympic champion. All right, it's exactly the same. Now, if I go out and I train hard, I will be a better runner tomorrow. But no matter how hard I train and how many books I read and how many courses I go to, I will never beat Usain Bolt in a running race as long as I live.
Not without
I'd like
cheating.
Without cheating. So what makes us think we can do that with leadership? We think that somebody can do a course and go and do so, right? So there's one. You can't just do a course and become a great leader, right? What we need to be doing, and there's some really cool work on this. When I was doing my MBA, I did my leadership, like my major thesis was on leadership, and I did it and I did a case study on a work by a guy called Dr. Graham Abella. And big shout out to Dr. Abella because he helped me and provided me with information while I was doing my thesis, and it was invaluable. He went on, he was a commander in one of the Canadian police forces when he wrote a particular paper that I'm going to refer to in a minute. And he went on to be chief of police in Alberta, and I'm not sure what he's doing today. But he wrote a really amazing piece on leadership, and he brought in a model called the exemplar model on how we would best choose leadership. But his greatest piece of advice for police forces, but this would apply for any organisation who is looking to promote leadership, and that is that we need to be identifying leaders at the earliest possible stage. We need to be identifying our natural leaders at the academy stage, even prior to the academy. People need to be earmarked as they're doing their recruitment as this is a potential leader. And we need to be developing them early, not waiting, not till afterwards. And his model was called the exemplar model, because what he said is there's 4 points of recognition of a good leader. He says that the first point of recognition is generally the peers. So it will be demonstrated by the peers. Remember I said leadership's about followership. You can't just say, I want to be a good leader and you're a leader. Your peers will identify that you're a leader. You will naturally be a leader within a group. That should be immediately recognised by your supervisors, your immediate supervisors. So there's point 2 in the circle. Point 3 is that leadership, executive leadership, should recognise, based upon recommendation from the supervisors, leadership should be able to look at that and say, okay, well, let us assess, let's have a look at your evidence. Yep, we agree that person's probably got some leadership qualities. The 4th point is the most important one, and that is that the individual themselves recognises that they're a leader and are ready to lead. Now, I know people in this case. I don't want to mention names unwillingly, but there was a sergeant who we worked with in Tennant Creek, Damo, and he was one of the best leaders I ever worked with, and he just genuinely didn't want to go much higher than where he was, and he was happy. And there are others who say, look, I'd like to get some more time on the road before I step up and take a leadership role on. I say, I think that's admirable. But it's important that all 4 of those recognise, but then it's imperative that you start to develop that person now. And that means that they don't necessarily have to carry rank, but we start at an early stage as a probationary constable, putting them in charge of, look, we're running an alcohol operation over the weekend. We would like you to help write it and lead it and work with it. You don't have to have the rank on your shoulders to lead those operations, but we start to give them responsibility. Right? Now, this doesn't mean that somebody doesn't start shining later in their career. And Dr. Abella spoke about this, that somebody who's been in the job 10 years might just suddenly come out of their shell and start to develop and become a great leader. And anywhere along the stage, you can recognise someone as a leader and start to develop them. But notice that it's about recognising their leadership, and so that's the first one. Now, the second one I'll get to in a minute because I'd love you guys to comment on this. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. If you don't mind, I don't want to break your train of thought, but I'd like to comment
on
it.
Go for it.
So, 2 points here, and I think talking about solutions, I think I see one of the problems in that, and we can probably talk about it a bit more. It's very difficult to measure that in a very, very academic way where you can show evidence to a tribunal as to why this person has been there. It was the vibe, it was Marbo, he's just a good leader. He did this, therefore he's a good leader. So there needs to be some academic work about how do we get the metrics to measure and objectively measure against other people leadership ability. That's my first point there. My second point was talking about fellowship. You've done it in this bloody interview. I've noticed you do it. It's the building up of the fellowship. The reason people follow good leaders is because they get boosted by a leader. So for us, it was always talking about debriefs. It was always the Damo. That was outstanding. Great pickup, mate. You picked that up and in front of the whole crowd, all of a sudden, hell yeah. And so making people who work for you, because they're your leader, make them feel very valued and because it encourages them, it gives them the motivation to continue to work. So they've got the fellowship because they feel valued and they actually work hard. Their hard work gets acknowledged without going on big rants. And I've said this time and time again on this podcast. Do you know how easy it was to get someone in a whole world of shit in the Northern Territory Police? One email. Do you know how hard it was to get a bravery medal for somebody? Fucking near impossible. It was basically half a shift's worth of paperwork to try and get somebody in the right text, in the right it had to be in the right font, in the right document, in the right blah, 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 then sent to the right place or it'd come back and then get sent to another place, have to be signed off by the hierarchy. So you couldn't tell someone attaboy, but you could kick the shit out of them with an email. And that was so 2 things.
That's important, Damo, right? Because not to mention you had to apply to get your own service medals. I just
didn't.
I eventually, there was one of the lovely ladies there. Shout out to those admin ladies up there who just said, we got a bunch of medals of yours sitting here. You're going to come and get them. I went, I'm waiting for someone to recognise me and actually serve them on me, but No, I won't apply for my own medals. Thanks very
No.
much. And anyway,
Yeah.
they just came in the mail one day, and I
Yeah, me
appreciated that.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
One of those was a commendation. Like
Yeah, that's
seriously,
bullshit.
it's out.
That's
It's just unreal. But look, you are correct. That we are. You used a word there, value, right? And I want to make sure I leave enough time here to talk about five. There are five leadership qualities that are generally recognised across the academic literature as being good qualities, or that natural leaders throughout history have all possessed. But before I get on to that, and then I'm going to conclude with one factor, which is around value. So if I forget, please one of you boys remind me about value, because you've hit on something really important there, Damo. Value is important. I don't think, and I'm not contradicting you here, because finding metrics for things like leadership are difficult. But just because something's difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So let's reverse that. What do we currently do in police forces across the Western world to pick our leaders? We make them sit. Now, I think they've moved a little bit away from this in recent times, so I don't want to take away from the stuff that Martin Dole's currently doing in the Northern Territory and the current leadership. I'm now reflecting upon the long period of time in which I was there. But largely when I'm speaking to my colleagues around the country, the same metric is measured. So how do we currently pick our leadership now, Schultze? What do most police forces have as the gateway to gaining a promotion?
Basically, by doing exams and getting the promotion.
Correct, right? So the only metric we choose to pick leadership is the results on a one-time exam. Now, to put this into perspective, which this is something that that shocks most people, right? A long time ago, to become a commercial airline pilot, you do a competency-based training program, which means that you demonstrate a bunch of competencies, which is a combination of academic exams and practical assessments, but the large part's practical assessment, and you get that's how you attain your license. We train our Air Force pilots to fly $30 million planes using a competency-based training system. Mm-hmm. But to pick our leaders, we do a one-time exam process. And it's ludicrous, right? To think that somebody qualifies to be a leader based on their ability to regurgitate and remember swathes of legislation verbatim is tantamount to saying that an actor who plays Albert Einstein now is a foremost expert on the theory of relativity. The kid may never have finished high school, but you can remember lines, so therefore you understand the theory of relativity. That's nonsense. And it's exactly the same in leadership. So yes, the metrics may be more difficult to actually measure somebody who's a natural leader, but I think they're far easier than suggesting that just because you pass an exam, a one-time memory exam, that you are somehow a leader. So there's no metric of leadership in that at all. So, and there's one more factor in that, because I'm sure you boys will comment on this. Because I was actually fairly naturally good at doing exams. I actually never failed an exam in my life until I joined the Northern Territory Police. So going for a senior sergeant's exam was the only exam in my entire life I have ever failed.
Yeah.
And there's
If
one
you ever
more
need
thing
to talk about that, Andy, just talk to me, mate. I'll be able to just calm you down there.
Yeah.
But the point
Keep going.
point
You're
being,
wrong. You keep going.
no, sorry. There's one more thing, Damon. I'll bring you back to it, right? That I couldn't understand this. That friends of mine who were doing law exams, like there was another sergeant I worked with in Tennant Creek, a superstar, a particular sergeant who looked a hell of a lot like the James Bond character. He was studying law at the time, and he was saying, "This is ridiculous. I go and do a law exams, like something that actually requires intelligence, and I have an open book. And my job is to be able to apply the legislation that I'm there at." So half these people who could verbatim remember bits of legislation, that was great. But I know, I worked with them on the road, and I don't want to be critical of people, but their ability to apply that legislation was non-existent. Mm-hmm. There's a vast difference in between memorizing pieces of legislation and applying that legislation. Mm. So we weren't even getting that right. So what this has got to do with leadership is beyond me. There is nothing in that at all that demonstrates leadership. And yet it might be difficult, but it's not impossible. And it's a much better way. The outcomes, we've spoken about it. The outcomes in proactive-based, intelligence-led policing is going to be far better having natural leaders in control. Your corruption is going to drop immediately because your management of poor staff is going to improve out of sight. And you're going to lose that disconnect that comes with having poor leadership. So therefore your performance levels are going to raise. Like the positive outcomes of picking solid leaders and choosing and developing solid leaders far outweighs the difficulty it is in picking a leader. So sorry, Damo, I'll cut back to you now.
No. I wasn't saying I agreed with it. I was just saying that would be the thing, the metric, because it was almost going back to the fact that there is no line up metric. It is still, there's going to be a level of subjectivity there. And that's the trouble, because inquiry boards and courts and people who oversight and audit things, they love very, very objective metrics. They love to go 1 + 2 = 3. A lot of those people are not leaders' backsides. They could barely talk in front of 3 people. However, they're very good at crunching numbers.
They are, but here's the flip side of that again, Damo, is that if you've got less corruption and you've got better performance and you've got better, and I'm not just talking about performance, I'm talking about job performance, but I'm also talking about staff management, the management of poor performance, then you're going to reduce the interaction with those kind of agencies because you're doing the right thing, the right way, because you've got the right people leading what's going on. And if you go to private enterprise, and this is the biggest thing, this is where again, we're back to where the rubber hits the road. In private enterprise, their objective, and we'll get to, the objective is so important, Damo, is to pick the best person with the best training to do the job the best way. That's how it works in the private sector. Why? Because money is the bottom line.
That's right. If you don't, you go broke and your company disappears.
Correct. So it's in their best interest to choose people to do that. And the best high-performing companies, including the best high-performing organisations like the Central Intelligence Agency in the States, FBI, others, they are choosing their people directly out of school, out of high school, out of college and out of university. Why? Because they understand that it's important to choose your leaders early to do leadership. And it's why I think, like, the military doesn't have things perfect, but their method of choosing leadership works. It's been tried and tested for millennia, and they know it works. There is no point putting people in charge. And even the military is learning now what happens when you don't put leaders in charge. So here's back to just one of the causal factors of what happens here and what the problem is. One of the victims policing face, one of the victims of leadership that policing has is this: peacetime. So what happens is the vast majority of time happens with no crisis. So if you break down a year, there are a series of crises and critical incidents that occur. But the vast majority of time doesn't have that. So your poor leaders can just flit around and fluff around and boss people around and bust people down and issue decrees that don't make sense and, get everyone offside, and it doesn't really have a major effect. But when a critical incident happens, mark my word, watch this. I want you to remember back, and I want anybody listening to this from a policing background to think about this and recognise what I'm saying. How many times when a major incident or a critical incident happened, did your poor leaders, and we all know them, just suddenly disappear, go off sick, get stuck, pushed into a back room. Either they made the decision to step away themselves, or leaders above them went, we don't want you anywhere near this. Let's put you in charge of supervising cups of teas to people out on the road. And your natural leaders just sifted up to the surface, and they were relied upon to do stuff. Big problem was, though, if things went wrong, they were very happy to crucify those people who stood up for 5 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
And the poor leader stayed safely off to the side.
Yeah.
And so I want you to think about that, and think about how many times you went to a major incident and those poor leaders were just suddenly missing, but your great leaders stepped up.
Can I just butt in there, Andy?
Yeah, please.
Look, I'm probably a good example. I struggled with exams. Always have my entire life, right? However, I didn't even pass my senior connies. But
Yeah.
I passed my detectives because, I mean, you do a 6-week course or something going through, just spending your time on that. I was so busy doing the job and getting experience, I didn't give any time to actually studying for the exam of being a senior connie. However, I think by the time I finished my career, I'd spent close to 4 years as a sergeant. So they put me to the rank of sergeant because they believed I can do the job. And they wouldn't have kept on putting me there if I couldn't.
Yeah.
And there is, and look, this isn't about me. There is 100 police in the Northern Territory who were in exactly the same role. I know there was one, I think it was Casuarina, and or it was Palmerston or something, and he was always the sergeant of the crew, and he was the same thing. He couldn't pass it, and they
First
go,
class Connie. I think I know the one you're talking about.
yep, and everybody loved him. They said he is such a good patrol group leader. Like, he was just awesome, but couldn't pass an exam. However,
So
sorry, Dana.
we're all very good friends with the bloke who did exactly that. He walked out as the shift. He wore 3 stripes in his senior constable's exam, failed it, and then went straight back to being the shift sergeant on the road. So it's not, and the thing was, when shit hit the fan, he was your boy. He just immediately knew what needed to be done. Was all over it. Had that shit tight as a button. Just couldn't remember legislation. More to the point, the other thing was he knew legislation. He just couldn't remember it verbatim and passed the exam. It was obscene.
And what you said there, Andy, is about applying it.
Yeah.
Understanding, and like you said, the triggers and all that sort of thing, and actually looking at it from a common sense point of view is so important. And I think, like, when I got the job in Ramagini as a sergeant, I beat a substantive sergeant for that job as only a conning first class. But my experience, because they'd been tucked away, was far more, was actually counted in that application. But, you know, and that's just, there's hundreds of stories which are similar.
Yeah. No, there really is, mate. And look, it just goes to prove, and it's not just me, this is not just an observation we're making or sour grapes. This is written about in academic literature across the Western world, that exam-based selection of leadership is defunct. It is a broken way to do things. It is resulting in poor leadership, and there is a direct correlation in promoting poor leaders and an increase in poor performance and corruption. And we need to get to this. Corruption is not solved by busting people who have been poorly led over a period of time. I said this last week. Corruption starts and finishes at the top and goes down. Should be zero tolerance of corrupt behaviour. There should be zero tolerance of criminal behaviour. Zero tolerance. However, if you want to proactively fix a corruption problem, you have to start by promoting good leaders. If the Western Police Force focused its attention, if the Australian Police Forces, if the Northern Territory Police Force focused its attention on choosing, selecting and promoting, developing good, sound, natural leaders, all the rest will come into line. That's not Andy Bedwell thought. That's what the academic literature says. So we need to jump on it. It's as simple as that. And I listen. It seems like that's occurring a little bit in the Northern Territory at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm certainly aware of some recent promotions over the last couple of years that I would strongly support. Should have happened a long time ago in some cases. There are some names that I've heard there that would make currently working at superintendent and commander rank who made fantastic senior constables. Probably should have stayed there. But there are some people that I've heard in recent times that have been promoted that I applaud it, that I've worked with and think are great leaders. So I hope that that's going to create the momentum in change that's required to deal with what is a difficult place to police, and that's the Northern Territory.
Yeah.
Mate, I just want to change it up slightly, only because I want to get to the absolute crux of leadership at different levels. I just want your input into something. So the military is pretty good for this because it's very structured, very, very structured. You go down to your initial leaders being like your senior private soldiers, and then moving up to your section commander is that initial substantive leader in the organisation of an element within an organisation. And at that level, the leadership, a lot of that leadership is by example. So it's follow me, watch what I do, follow me, come with me, come with me. That has to drop off because you can't have fat generals running at the front to be the first one to be slaughtered. So obviously that drops off and the leadership style changes. But obviously that steps up. Lieutenant, it might be still come with me, follow me at that level as a platoon commander, but then you get to that next level up. That's where the leadership style, I'd like your input in this. It's not so he's awesome because he's so fast and he knows exactly what to do and I just love following that guy. I'll follow that guy to the end of the world. It comes to a point where the leadership style has to be you allow those natural superstars to just be superstars. You give them an objective and you take off their leash and you let them fly. And that's where the leadership goes. And I can't quote it like you're quoting names. And mate, this first time there's ever been a bibliography of the two ordinary cops. It's amazing. So anyway, it's always just been the vibe, man. That's it. Yeah, but it's always been the level of truth. So anyway, I can't remember who it was, but there was a US Navy captain who just the best thing I'd ever heard when it came to that much higher level strategic leadership was talking about. He goes, I never told my guys what to do anything. He goes, the only immediate decision that I would make would be that I am the only person who pushes the button to launch a nuclear weapon. That is the only thing I do on this ship. There's nothing else that I do on this ship. I would say to my executive officer or whoever it is that they used to call him a sailing master. It's obviously not a sailing master anymore, but they would go to the person who is the XO, it's the executive officer. XO, take this vessel to the Persian Gulf. The executive officer knows absolutely everything about that ship. Absolutely, his technical knowledge is beyond reproach. He's all across exactly how to take that vessel with the troops on board, with the sailors on board. He can take that thing to the Persian Gulf. So the captain has now delegated that responsibility away and obviously must maintain responsibility of that delegation. However, can trust the executive officer to carry out that intent. That's that taken care of.
Yep.
There would be other elements on board the vessel that need to be taken care of. And it's just make that occur. And then go, what do you think we should do? Tell me that, oh, sir, we have this problem. What should we do about that? Well, sir, I think this work. That sounds good to me. Is there any other input? No, this. No. Okay, that's an excellent idea. Make that occur. So what you've done is you've received the feedback from subject matter experts who know exactly what they're doing. You've put that all together, used probably a little bit of your knowledge as well, and you've then made the call and empowered the people below you to make that shit happen. And that is that higher level strategic leadership. It's not just with me, boys. That's where you start. It's like you've made a decision, you need to back up and you're showing them the direction. You don't show guys who are absolute experts in their job when you're in charge of 3,500 people. You don't show them all how to do it. What you do is you give them the environment and the situation to allow them to carry out their incredible skill sets to the absolute best of their ability.
And don't micromanage. Yeah, but I just want to put another point in there. So when I actually moved across to Borroloola, there was a couple of people that were going to put in, for the sergeant's position. I'd just run Ramangini for quite a few years, and they said to me, well, you're going there, wouldn't you want to run for it? And I said, if you put in for the sergeant's position, I will do whatever you tell me to do. Because I recognise you as a leader. You're a good leader. You know what you're doing, and you're going to give me the opportunity to do what I do best, which is what I love. And so that's another very important point to make.
Yeah.
Like you, just because you have leadership skills, it doesn't mean you can't follow.
Yes.
So, listen, you've hit both of you. You've struck on something really important. So this ties those 2 points together, which is it goes back to leadership's not about leadership; it's about followership. So here's another thing. This one actually came from Nelson Mandela. So leadership, a great leader only needs to know how to up manage, not down manage.
Yeah.
So you will notice good leaders, right? Poor leaders, all they do is down manage. That's micromanagement, right? Because bossing people and telling them what to do is a defense mechanism for the exposure of their shit leadership. See, most poor leaders know they're poor leaders inherently. They doubt themselves, therefore. So there's one, first of all. A great leader trusts, so we'll get to the 5 points, and trust is one of them. A great leader trusts the people below them to make the decisions they need. So I would always say to my staff, your job is to up manage. I need to know what you need. Your job is to tell me what you need. My job is to make your job easy. You know what? One of the greatest skill sets a leader can have, and this was, George Washington was renowned for this, apparently, that he was phenomenal at making really, really good, hard decisions in the most pressure cooker situations. That is the skill set of a leader. Now, how do you measure that matrix? I don't know, but experience, and you can watch it over time. You watch great people make hard decisions. One of the characteristics you will recognize immediately in a poor leader is their inability to make decisions. Mm-hmm. They fail to. And that's compounded by the fact that people are terrified to make decisions because, as Damo pointed out earlier in this conversation, you are so quickly criticised. And this is one thing that I used to have a go at major crime about all the time. You'd sit around in a room. Now, I came from an environment, my first experience with major crime, I was coming from the high-speed environment of the command TAC team, where I would sit down in a room and say, man, we've got a massive problem. This has happened overnight. I want you to spitball ideas. I don't care how crazy it sounds. Let's talk about what we need to do here. To sitting in a major crime room, to have a detective sergeant in there talking about, like, asking for opinions, and people being terrified to open their mouths for fear of being criticised. And that, to me, is a prime example of poor leadership. You need to encourage people to speak. So what you were hitting at before, Schultze, is the word inspiration. So great leaders inspire work. Yep. They don't. You don't have to stand out there on the field. Good leaders sometimes will. General Cosgrove was renowned for this, for standing on the ground. One of the things, he was massive about core objectives. That's your job as a leader. Make critical decisions. Set a core objective, make sure that everybody understands that core objective. Make it simple. And I can't remember what his core objective. So he was the first
a safe
leader
and secure East Timor.
There it is. A safe and secure East Timor. Everywhere. That was it. So you make it simple and you make it direct. And all General Cosgrove was renowned for doing was turning up somewhere and saying, what's our core objective? And he didn't care if you were a cleaner, a general, or whatever. The first leader of a joint police military operation in Australian history, and it was highly successful, brilliantly run. He, of course, went on to become Governor General, but he understood the value on setting a core objective. He didn't need to micromanage. He trusted his troops. He set a clear objective. And I think, Damo, that answers what you're talking about, which is you don't need to have to. And you still do that, right? Leaders should still lead by example. The difference is as you go up the ladder, you don't need to be necessarily walking the troops. You've only got to be an example to the next layer.
Yeah.
And set that example. I'll tell you another category, just one more thing before I quickly talk about the 5 objectives to close us out, is that the first and foremost job of a great leader is to work out how to replace themselves. Yep. And I learned that one. I believe that might be another Colin Powell one. And his job was to, like he said, my very first job in leadership, in any leadership role, was to find the person who was going to succeed me, to train them up, to make sure that that person could do every aspect of my job. When I had done that and allowed myself to be replaced, I could then move on to the next project. But see, a poor leader does the exact opposite. They treat everybody as a threat. And they want to shun you out and shut you down or steal any good ideas as quickly as they can because they want to picket fence themselves from any threat. And so there's another one I reckon you'll all recognise. But so I think that answers what you're talking about, Damo. So your job is to just inspire. So the best way to lead by example is to inspire people. And you hit the nail on the head. Add value. I usually close with this, but I'll bring it up now because it's important. As a human being, the greatest... So John Maxwell, who runs the Maxwell Leadership Academy, based out of Atlanta in Georgia, it's a multi-million-dollar thing, paid for by the people he used to do professional development sessions with because they said, what you're doing... So he provided leadership training to presidents, to executive committees around the world. And eventually those there said, we need an academy for this. And they paid like a $28 million building and operation for him to run out of, the Maxwell Leadership Academy. And what he would talk about is leadership, like your job as a great leader is not to tell people what to do. It's to inspire people to want to do things. The way we inspire best is to add value. If you can find a way to add value to whoever is in the room with you, you've done your jobs. You've done more than you could ever do as a leader. That starts in the home. If you can wake up and work out how you can add value to your own house, to your wife, to your partner, to your workplace, if you can genuinely add value to somebody else's life, you've done more in leadership than 9 out of 10 labelled leaders in the world. Work out how to add value. And great leaders know how to do that because they're not self-focused. But if you'll bear with me to shut this out, this is not me, right? These are not my words. When I research leadership, and across the board, when you study great leaders, these 5 qualities stand out across the board. And those 5 qualities are this. So these are the qualities of great leaders. Number 1, at the dead center, I usually draw a little spoke that starts at the dead center. At the dead center of this is that great leaders understand what the core objective is. Okay, so that's the first thing. They understand core objective and purpose. Underpinning that core objective are 2 key things. First is needs. Great leaders understand what the need is. If you don't understand the need, then you can't create a purpose. But do you know how many times we go out in a policing environment and just start doing shit? Just go out and do it. I used to talk about this. There were highly recognised, highly qualified units out there that I just regarded as great big fidget spinners. They were overqualified people who achieved nothing but look good. You need to be addressing a need. So great leaders understand that there is a need and they create a core objective based on the need. Next underpinning factor is being others focused. Great leaders recognise it's not about me. It's about other people in the room. If you can work that out, you've gone 9/10 of the way to being good human. But great leaders understand it's about other people, not about you. Too many poor leaders out there make it all about them.
Yeah.
Right. Overpinning those three things are two really, really key points. First one is trust. Second one is communication, all of which we've mentioned today. Great leaders develop an atmosphere of trust. Trust is always linked with accountability. High trust, high accountability. Low trust, no accountability. That's the recipe.
Yeah.
And good leaders are great communicators. Most importantly, they know how to communicate the core objective and the need it's addressing. What that is the why. Great leaders understand why they're doing what they're doing at any given stage, and they know how to communicate that so that people understand why they're doing it. All of that relates to adding value. How can I as an individual, or how can we as a team add value to this problem or to this circumstance or to this thing? We do it by understanding the core objective, by understanding the why, communicating that to our team, trusting them to do the job, and helping them to understand that this is not about you. It's about the team. It's about the people involved. And we forget this. Our job is to serve people. There's people at the other end of what we do. And generally speaking, people at the other end of a problem know a buttload more than we do about the problem. We forget this. I talk about this now in government, within government organisations. Your public servants, your job is to serve people at the other end. And understand that no matter how frustrated you get with it, those people at the other end of that complaint and that phone call know a hell of a lot more about the problem than you do.
Yeah.
But we want to go in there as the experts and tell people how to do stuff because, and therein lies the problem with poor leadership. Poor leaders are so focused on themselves and how they can develop who they are, that they forget that they're there to serve the people under them. That leadership is not about that. Their job is not to down manage. Their job is to create an environment that the people below them can work better in today than they did yesterday. And I'm going to quote another great detective sergeant right here, right now, and he's sitting with us. When he went to work with those peanuts at the COVID operation, he said one thing, Damo, I'm going to quote you. I'm here to be grease in the system, not sand in the works. And that's the job of a leader.
Yeah.
Mate, that's amazing you said that. I used to say it 5 times a day in meetings, IMT meetings. Guys, we're the oil in the machine, not the sand. Stop coming up with problems, come up with solutions, because the problems are coming thick and fast. Kind of a bit stumped. Yeah. I don't know where I coined it. I think it wasn't, but once again, it wasn't something I came up with because I'm some bloody academic genius. It was just I saw constant creation of problems. And it was like, for Christ's sake, guys, you're just making this harder. We are here to solve the problem. Come up with a solution to that shit. Be the oil, not the sand. That's all it was. It was,
Yeah, spot on, mate. And look, there's a lot we could talk about here, you know, and it's a subject I'm really passionate about. I want to see, like, I'm so passionate about, you know, policing, law enforcement, frontline work, man. I have been a frontline operator all of my life. I started as a lifesaver and then a professional lifeguard. I worked as a professional firefighter for years. I worked overseas on operations. Then I came back and joined police, and I did policing for 20 years. And that, I'm passionate about it. That's I love it. I would be back tomorrow. So listen, I want to see things improve. But I like, genuinely speaking, when anybody brings up what is the problem with policing, why are people leaving, what is this, and I say the same thing all the time: leadership.
Yeah.
We need to start employing great leaders. And I'm not here to criticise, but there are some absolutely sensational police officers working in senior leadership around this country. The problem is they should have stayed as sensational police officers and left leadership to leaders. And like, that's a sad reality. Like, I'm probably going to offend people with that, but that is ultimately the truth.
Yeah.
We've failed to pick leaders to lead, and that's the result. This is the result we get. Just because
Yep.
you're an awesome cop and a very smart person and you've got lots of credentials does not make you a natural leader, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Mate, as we finish this off, though, Andy, I'm going to mention something that I remembered when we had a chat last week and we were talking about leadership. And
Yeah.
there was an incident in Catherine. You were my sergeant. I was in charge of the Family and Domestic Violence Unit, but you were the sergeant of Northern Investigations. So
Yeah.
I fell under your umbrella. I remember. I don't know whether you remember. I picked a fight with a superintendent at one stage about the when you had to do the frontline policing exam once a year because they wouldn't allow me to facilitate it. And anyway, I get very strong headed sometimes, and I was ready to go up and fight tooth and nail about what I believed in. And it was you. You pulled me aside and you said, Schultzy, you picked a fight with the super. Just apologise and let's get on with doing the job. And it's just because I respected you and you gave me, the ability to do my job. I said, yep, okay, I've done it. And that's probably a good prime example of what a good leader does. So I don't know whether you remember that one or not.
I do, and I do remember that particular superintendent, who was actually a bit of an enigma to me because went from being one of, like, probably another example of exceeding where their skill set, where their leadership limits went, and so when they exceeded past that, and that probably was their extent, that particular leader went on to higher ranks and, like, I think made some of the most monumentally poor decisions in Northern Territory Police history.
Yeah.
And I say that without qualm, and I would say it to him because there were things there's irreversible things that occurred under that particular individual's leadership. But look, yes, sometimes it is Schultzy about reading the room. And adding
It's picking battles.
and adding value
Yeah.
and picking battles you can win. Like, there's no point wasting time. Look, there's a whole other subject here I can talk about in terms of how to break down problems. There are problems you'll never solve. There are problems that you might be able to solve, and there's problems you can solve easily. Focus your attention on the problems that you put a bit of work in. Problems that are easy to solve, let them go. They solve themselves. Problems that you can never solve, we spend way too much time in particularly in police, trying to solve problems that are never going to be solved. We should just get on to the ones that you need to put a bit of work in. Mate, look, guys, I'm really conscious of time. We could go on and on about this.
We're going to
stuff
start
and
losing people.
certainly
People
get
are
down the
already
track.
sitting in driveways. People are sitting in their driveways. And listening. Come on, boys, I've got to get inside to the kids. But before we go, very, very quickly, I know there's a few cartons of the week, but I've got a big one. I know you got
Cool.
given one by Andy last week, but I've got a big one for you, Schultzy, and I mentioned it earlier. My brother pointed out to me today that when we were interviewing our mate, the dog handler from Cairns, we may have mentioned that we were going to chop a big piece of it out because the poor bugger had a coughing fit. Schultzy forgot to cut the whole thing out. So the entire coughing fit and us going, that's all right, mate, don't worry about it. We'll replay it. We'll cut this out. And then us counting down 3, 2, 1 and then starting again. Yeah, well, it's all in the podcast. So, Schultzy, that's a editorial carton right there.
It is, mate, and I will put my hand up for it. Yep, definitely. And I do owe one for last week, Andy, which you pointed out in last week's podcast for not actually putting my system on silent. So, mate, I'm owing cartons left, right, and centre here.
Yes. I must also, at one of the future ones here, there's another great friend of ours who we all worked with, both in Catherine and Damo. You worked with him in a SED unit. Great rugby family. He and I did an interview way back when in Darwin with a long-term Northern Territory offender by the name of Mark Tyday, and that is one of the funnier interviews in history that had some stuff that made it into court that I'll tell a story about that one next time.
Yes.
Definitely cardinable.
Oh,
No, I
mate,
remember it, and it's brilliant. But
we,
yeah,
we,
we
we
need to
should do one on
go.
bloopers.
Oh yeah.
Bloopers.
So Andy, I know exactly what you're talking about there, and it's worth mentioning. But it's funny because our mate who we mentioned last time, we said there's three people that will probably stay pretty common in the Children of Cops family, and you're one of them. The other
Yep.
one's Zach Rolfe, of course, and my mate Jake Lacey from Queensland Police, and he got on to me today and he said, "Bring Bedwell, this is amazing. What's he doing? I need to hook him up, bloody oath." They said Queensland Police are recruiting, mate. Fucking job's on. So yeah, you've got a mate up there. So yeah, no. Then once again, mate, we will cut it loose. But oh, geez, we could talk forever, but we just can't. It's just we realise there's a time that people just gets a bit long for them. And but once again, mate, just magnificent. Your insights are always good. And mate, first time ever that we've actually quoted the source of our information. We just sort of knew it was right, but yeah. So we're sitting here putting a bibliography together is outstanding, mate. We've been happy with that. So good work.
Well, it's good to
All
have the
good, gents.
intelligence behind
Yeah.
it.
Love you guys. You're doing a great job.
No, excellent, mate. We appreciate it, and we'll just keep talking rubbish, and people keep listening. So that's the main thing. So Andy, we'll have you back, mate. It's just bloody always a good laugh, and yeah, the insights are just your academic knowledge and the sense of humour, mate, is always amazing. I know this was a pretty serious one, but that's fine. We do that as well. But yeah, the laughs keep rolling. So I think we'll sign it off. Schulte, what do you think? We'll be back next week, and it might even be a live show. A bit of a surprise for next week, I think.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Yeah, we've got a few things in the pipeline, so yeah, it's actually going to be quite exciting. Definitely the next few months. So,
Yeah,
we won't let the cat out of the bag yet, but yeah, keep on listening. And again, Andy, thank you. We will get you back again. You've been an inspiration to everybody, so thank you.
Thanks, gents.
Children of Cops signing off. We'll see you next week.